The genetic code of a child cannot lie, but the bank account of a desperate man can make it speak any language he desires. Inside the suffocating mahogany-paneled walls of the family courtroom, the air hung thick with the scent of expensive cologne and cheap malice. Vance Sterling sat behind the defense table like a king awaiting his coronation, his tailored charcoal suit catching the harsh fluorescent light, while his fingers casually traced the gold rim of his luxury watch. Next to him, Chloe Vance leaned in close, her manicured hand resting heavily on his shoulder as she let out a low, performative sigh designed to echo through the gallery. Vance looked across the aisle at his estranged wife, Elena, his lips curling into a smug, devastating smirk that carried the weight of a man who believed he had just bought the legal system.
Elena remained completely motionless, a statue carved from pure ice, her hands folded neatly over her black silk dress, her breathing so perfectly regulated that her shoulders barely rose. She did not return his gaze, nor did she acknowledge the whispered taunts coming from his side of the room, her cold, calculating eyes fixed entirely on the empty judge's bench. Vance leaned over to his high-profile attorney, Pierce Vance, whispering loudly enough for the first 3 rows to hear that this was the day they finally buried the garbage and took back the keys to the kingdom. Chloe chuckled, a sharp, grating sound that cut through the low murmur of the gallery, her eyes scanning Elena's unbothered posture with a mixture of vanity and deep-seated irritation. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic, mechanical ticking of the wall clock, each second dragging the room closer to an inevitable execution of reputation.
Vance shifted his weight, his confidence radiating outward like a physical force, his posture commanding and arrogant as he prepared to watch the mother of his child stripped of her dignity, her financial security, and her name. He wanted a public spectacle, a devastating demonstration of his absolute power, ensuring everyone in the city knew that cross-examining his wealth was a fatal mistake. Elena simply closed her eyes for a single fraction of a second, her face completely detached from the emotional theater playing out around her, waiting for the trap to spring. Pierce Vance stood up with deliberate slowness, adjusting the sharp lapels of his designer suit before placing a heavy, gold-embossed leather folder onto the podium. He turned back toward the gallery, ensuring the reporters in the second row could see the official holographic seal of Apex Biogenetics gleaming under the lights. With a voice dripping in calculated sympathy, the attorney addressed Judge Evelyn Thorne, claiming that today the court would finally see past the emotional manipulation and look at the cold, unyielding truth of science. He drew out a thick, multi-page document, flipping directly to the final page, where a massive, bold 0% sat next to the genetic comparison metrics between Vance Sterling and his 7-year-old son. Pierce painted a devastating picture of a calculated fraud, loudly accusing Elena of fabricating a family lineage for nearly a decade simply to secure a permanent pipeline into Vance's multi-million-dollar real estate empire. Judge Thorne adjusted her glasses, her brow furrowing deeply as she leaned forward to examine the certified, officially stamped laboratory documentation that appeared legally airtight and absolute. Vance leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his legs with an air of complete invincibility, turning to whisper to Chloe about booking their celebratory flight to Monaco the second the gavel fell. Chloe smiled widely, her eyes locked onto Elena, waiting to see the first cracks of panic, the first tear, or a desperate gasp of injustice from the woman who was about to lose everything. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, the heavy weight of an irreversible legal defeat pressing down on Elena's side of the table as the judge shook her head in visible disappointment. Pierce Vance pressed his advantage, demanding an immediate termination of all parental responsibilities, the complete cancellation of the multi-million-dollar alimony claim, and an order forcing Elena to repay every dime of temporary support she had received during the separation. He declared that science had spoken, that the marriage was a lie from its inception, and that his client deserved immediate, absolute, total exoneration from this corporate and personal ambush. Vance's smirk grew wider, his breathing slow and triumphant, entirely convinced that his carefully constructed legal execution had just concluded without a single drop of his own blood being spilled. Marcus Vance stood up from Elena's table with a quiet, mechanical precision that immediately shifted the energetic frequency of the courtroom. He did not look at the fraudulent DNA report, nor did he look at the triumphant smirk plastering Vance Sterling's face, instead drawing a slim, encrypted tablet from his leather briefcase.
With a calm, clear voice that carried no anger but an absolute weight of authority, Marcus addressed the bench, stating that before the court ruled on a document generated by Apex Biogenetics, it was legally necessary to examine the current ownership structure of that exact medical laboratory. Pierce Vance instantly scoffed, aggressively interrupting to object on the grounds of relevance. But Judge Thorne raised her hand, her eyes narrowing as Marcus submitted a certified corporate registry filing directly to her digital screen. Marcus explained that exactly 48 hours ago, a private equity firm quietly acquired a 51% controlling interest in Vanguard Life Sciences, the parent network that owns and operates every single data stream inside Apex Biogenetics.
The primary, sole stakeholder of that equity firm was revealed to be Arthur Pendleton, who was currently sitting directly behind Elena in the front row, his expression as unreadable and elite as a professional chess master. Vance Sterling's foot stopped tapping, his eyes darting toward Arthur as a sudden, sharp coldness gripped the back of his neck, though he forced his posture to remain rigid. Marcus continued, explaining that as the new majority owners of the network, they had initiated a routine compliance audit of all high-profile paternity tests processed within the last 30 days, uncovering a dual-entry ledger on the secure internal servers. By submitting that specific falsified DNA report into evidence today, under penalty of perjury, Vance Sterling had just legally signed off on documents that cross-referenced directly with a hidden, automated digital backup audio file recorded inside the chief laboratory director's private office. Elena slowly turned her head, her icy eyes locking onto Vance for the very first time today, her lips parting into a microscopic, lethal smile that signaled the absolute closure of the mechanical trap he had walked into. Marcus pressed a single button on his tablet, and the pristine, unedited audio file instantly filled the courtroom, the sound quality so sharp that the mechanical hum of the laboratory's air conditioning could be heard in the background. Vance Sterling's own unmistakable voice boomed through the speakers, devoid of its current legal polish, explicitly bargaining with the chief lab technician over the precise wording of the falsified genetic report. The recording captured Vance offering a $2 million luxury condominium transfer, routed through a shell company called Horizon Holdings, in exchange for wiping his son's DNA from the final database entry. As the audio played, Vance's smug expression disintegrated into a grotesque mask of pure terror, his skin turning a sickly, translucent gray as a thick layer of cold sweat instantly broke through his expensive foundation. His breathing became incredibly rapid and shallow, his fingers twitching violently against the mahogany table as he listened to himself laugh on tape about how easily he was going to destroy his wife's reputation. Chloe gasped, violently pulling her hand away from Vance's shoulder as if his skin had suddenly turned to poison, her eyes widening in horror as she realized she was sitting next to an exposed criminal. Pierce Vance, the slick defense attorney, went completely pale, his hands shaking as he looked down at the Horizon Holdings name on his own digital notepad, realizing that was the exact same shell company he had personally set up to hide Vance's marital assets. Pierce instantly rose, his voice cracking with panic as he turned on his own client on the record, loudly declaring to the judge that he had absolutely no prior knowledge of this fraudulent evidence and formally requesting an immediate recusal to protect his own legal license. Vance tried to speak, to yell, to deny the voice on the recording, but his throat seized completely, his chest heaving as he suffocated under the weight of his own absolute exposure, surrounded by the wreckage of his own arrogant legal strategy. Judge Evelyn Thorne's face transformed into a mask of pure, righteous ice as she slammed her gavel down with a resounding crack that echoed like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. She did not look at Vance Sterling, her gaze fixed entirely on the evidence screen as she declared the fraudulent DNA report completely null, void, and a systemic assault on the integrity of the judicial system. With a voice that cut through the room like a razor, Judge Thorne executed an immediate emergency order, freezing every single domestic and international liquid asset, bank account, and real estate holding linked to Vance, his fiancée Chloe, and his entire property development firm. She stripped Vance of every legal right to the marital estate, awarding 100% of the corporate assets, the primary residences, and maximum punitive damages for extreme emotional distress to Elena, without a single fraction of hesitation. The judge then looked directly at the bailiff standing at the rear of the room, ordering them to lock the heavy courtroom doors immediately to prevent anyone from leaving the perimeter. She picked up her desk phone, instructing her clerk to patch a direct line through to the federal prosecutor's office to initiate immediate arrest warrants for corporate forgery, criminal perjury, and grand-scale bribery. Vance let out a hollow, strangled sound, his knees buckling slightly against the defense table as the weight of total financial ruin and immediate imprisonment collapsed over his shoulders. Chloe scrambled backward, grabbing her designer purse and sprinting toward the exit, only to be stopped dead in her tracks by two armed bailiffs who blocked the doors with unyielding authority. Vance reached out a trembling hand toward his former attorney, but Pierce Vance turned his back completely, actively packing his briefcase to distance himself from the criminal radioactive fallout that had just consumed his client. The courtroom erupted into a frenzy of whispered panic, but through the chaos, Elena remained perfectly calm, watching the absolute destruction of her enemy with the quiet, satisfied detachment of a strategist who had executed the perfect checkmate. Elena stood up with a slow, deliberate grace, her black silk dress falling back into place without a single wrinkle as she smoothly closed her pristine briefcase. She did not cast a single glance toward the broken man weeping against the defense table, nor did she look back as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked tightly around Vance Sterling's trembling wrists. She walked down the center aisle of the courtroom with a quiet, unbothered power, her footsteps echoing rhythmically against the marble floor, while the gallery fell completely silent in her presence. Outside the courthouse, the crisp afternoon air hit her face, a stark and welcoming contrast to the suffocating deception of the room she had just permanently conquered. She shared a brief, silent nod of mutual corporate victory with Arthur Pendleton before stepping into the back of a waiting black sedan, leaving the wreckage of Vance's empire completely in her rearview mirror. If you love seeing arrogant villains completely unravel and karma served perfectly cold, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another devastating courtroom checkmate.